Alrighty. It's like a little bit longer lecture in this one, and this I have to admit at the outset is a topic of personal significance for me. It's one where I am to some extent an advocate of a sort, and an outlier of a sort, and so I want to introduce you to this issue, to have you think about it, and I especially want to introduce it to you because it's just not in the text. They, which I think itself is fascinating. I'll get back to that point, but they spend a lot of time talking about the ethics of human research, and they don't even discuss animal research, which I think is fascinating. So I want to take you on a little bit of a mind bender here, and get you thinking about things a lot, because it's an issue that I think deserves thought, and so often thought is preempted. And we try to indoctrinate our students to just believe what we're doing is okay. But I think we should be thinking about it first. And I'll come back to why this is so important as we go through. So let's just get into this issue of ethics. So anytime you're doing research, you're trying to usually figure something out for the public good, but that doesn't give you the right to do whatever you want to do that. And this is a particularly extreme example. Sorry that some of it's kind of blurry here, but everything you need to know is on the left. There are people who have been very unscrupulous. So, for example, this Edward Jenner observed that milkmaids, so milkmaids were people that worked on farms and actually got the milked the cows back in the old days before factory farming, when people actually milked the cows by hand, and then they would deliver the cows to people in the neighborhood. Deliver the milk to people in the neighborhood. And this was a time when smallpox was very common. A lot of people were getting very sick from smallpox. But Jenner noticed that milkmaids didn't seem to get sick, at least not at the same rate. It's like they were protected somehow. And he thought this was because there was a version of smallpox that cows experienced called cowpox. And so, sort of like a vaccine sort of notion, he thought that these milkmaids were exposed to cowpox. Maybe cowpox was not as powerful, and so they were able to defeat it and get some immunity from the poxes from that, and that's why they didn't get smallpox. That's his idea. Okay, so far so good. By the way, let's just talk about that. That's sort of observational research for him to notice, that milkmaids are not getting this, and then to come up with this idea, this theory, and now he wants to put his theory to the test. That's very empirical of him, right? How did he put his theory to the test? This is where things go wrong. So injected pus from cowpox. So literally he would find cows infected with cowpox, he would get some pus from them, and he would inject that into a child. And then later he would intentionally expose the child to smallpox. This is not all that different from how we develop vaccines today, with one critical difference, which is the person consents to this, and we would never do it to a child, right? We would do it to consenting adults, etc., and we probably wouldn't use the pus from a blister. We would do something a little bit better, but literally this is the kind of thing that was just being done for a while. Scientists kind of had free reign. And in psychology, we'll talk about some other studies. You'll get them especially in AO2, but you probably know some of these. First of all, the Milgram study, the textbook showed you already. It's amazing that they would unveil the Milgram study in chapter 1. That's supposed to be held back for later. But the Milgram study was very controversial ethically. And also the Stanford prison experiment was very controversial. These were experiments done in the sort of 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s. And at some point, people said, okay, there have to be rules. You can't just let researchers do whatever they want. And this becomes especially powerful, by the way, because every researcher, every researcher gets their money from the federal government to do the research, to sponsor the research. And so the federal government can say, sure, but you have to follow these rules, and we're going to make sure you do. So the textbook talks a lot about the human rules. Let me kind of say it in a different way, and we'll start there. This is important for a couple of reasons for you. And one of them is we're going to ask you to take part in studies as part of those Sonos credits where you can be part of studies. And so I want you to understand the rules that apply to you and your participation. And so they're presented differently. Here's the way I often talk about them. This aligns pretty well with the text. So first of all, when it comes to humans, you're not supposed to coerce anybody to be part of a study. They're supposed to do it voluntarily, of their own free will. They are also supposed to do it under conditions of what we call informed consent. And that means the informed part means that they are told what the risky aspects of the research are. And so they understand the risks. And with that understanding, they nonetheless consent to participate. We call that informed consent. Anonymity, confidentiality, once they provide data to us, we protect their identity. And so we use their data, but we usually strip it of any information about who that data came from, and it just becomes data. And we have to protect the confidentiality and identity of all of our participants all the time. So you never have to worry about anybody showing a presentation saying, this is so-and-so's data, look at that person. We couldn't do that. We'd be in a lot of trouble if anybody did that. Instead, we usually look at group data anyway. We say, here's the average from this group and the average from that group, etc. Risk, we simply cannot place you at significant mental or physical risk. We must do no harm when we work with you. And debriefing, and this especially applies to deception, and the textbook talks about deception a little bit. At the end of the study, and this is important for you guys, by the way, when you participate in research, at the end of that participation, the researcher should spend some time with you, letting you know what the study was about, what, if anything, was being manipulated, what theory they were testing, and you should leave this with a good sense of why your participation was valuable. You as a student should use this as an opportunity to understand research a little better. You just participated. Tell me about this project I just participated in. I want to know what you're studying and what's going on. It's also a chance for you, by the way, to interact with more senior students who are doing research. So you can form, how did you get into that lab? You can form these connections. Networking, always really good. So please make sure they do debrief you. They owe you that. That's what they are supposed to, you're giving them your data. They're supposed to be giving you an educational experience. They're supposed to be giving you, a very concrete sense of how psychological research is happening. And that's what they do in the debriefing. They tell you all about their research. So please make sure they debrief you. If they don't, if they just try to shoo you away, let me know, okay? I'll make sure they stop that. Okay, now, I want to take this all as a first context to talk about animal research, which the textbook, again, doesn't even talk about. And here, let me get on a little bit of a high horse. What I find objectionable about many universities, ours included, is that we present our approach to animal research as if there was no controversy involved. I told you back in the days of Descartes, when he started suggesting vivisection, that there was controversy then. In fact, Darwin and others were being asked what they felt about it, what their position was, etc. And in reality, the act of animal research has been controversial right from the get-go. Why? Well, let's look at point 2, informed consent. I said you couldn't just inject kids with some cow pus. You're not allowed to do that. Well, no, but we do things to animals without them knowing what's going on. We don't give them the right to give consent, and we kind of can't because they don't speak our language, right? We may never be able to get informed consent from an animal, but we can maybe find something like it. That is, we could say, hey, if humans would consent to this, then maybe we can assume an animal, if they understood, would too. So maybe we can get around this. But this is the one, number 4, that really kind of irks me. Let's come back to that and let's talk about the guidelines for animal research. So here's human research. Let's do animal research. So first of all, you can't do any research to an animal without a justification. So, you are not allowed to just go ahead and do things to animals. You have to have a clear research idea that you're investigating, and there has to be a real rational reason why this research, could lead to an advance in our knowledge or understanding. Okay, so you have to have a clear scientific purpose. You do have to take care of the animals while you have them. You have to house them well. One joke I sometimes tell, or just sort of funny story, I guess, is I did my undergraduate at the University of New Brunswick, and at that time, the psychology building did not have air conditioning. Well, the building, except for the animal part, the part where the animals are, had air conditioning because they had to be protected from extreme temperatures. The humans, on the other hand, did not have to be. So we would all be sweating to death in the summers in the psych building while the animals were nice and cool. So there are rules about how you house animals, how you treat animals while they're in your care. And there are people that make sure that you follow those rules. Okay, you have to get your animals legally. You can't go out in the woods and pick them up. And you are supposed to minimize suffering. So design procedures that involve the minimum suffering that is possible. But just look at that, minimize suffering. With humans, number 4, do no harm. With animals, minimize suffering. What does that imply? That implies that some suffering is allowed. And it absolutely is. We do things to animals in a research setting that would be considered unethical if done to humans. These can involve pretty extreme things like removing parts of their brain to see what that part does. Giving them a disease so that you can then try to test out various cures for the disease. Exposing them to extreme stresses to see what the effects of stress are on a biological being, etc. Any of these things, if you tried to do them to a human, you would not be allowed. You would go by a research ethics board. You'd say, here's what I want to do to these humans. I want to expose them to extreme stress. And the board would say, you're not allowed. You can't do that. That's inhumane. It's inhumane. Humane. Versus, so the implication here, as we go across these two things, is there's something about being human that makes us worthy of a higher ethical standard. We have to be treated better than animals because of something. What is that thing? Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say, there is some controversy, and I want to represent the pro-animal research side very well and say, hey, they're sensitive to this. It's not like animal researchers are a bunch of callous jerks that are just trying to do nasty stuff to animals. They are not. And in fact, they embrace this 3 R's notion to replace, if they can find a better way to do research than involve animals, then do it that other way. Only use animals when you have to is one way of saying that. Use the least animals you can possibly use. So expose the least number of them to whatever horrible thing it is. So you figure out ahead of time how many animals you think you need, and don't use any more than you need. So reduce the amount you need. And then to the extent you can reduce suffering by refining your procedures, do so. Okay, so these 3 R's are there. Now notice they're called the principles of a humane experimental technique. It's certainly not human experimental technique. This is not what we would apply to humans. And so the humane thing seems a little tricky to me here. But they're trying to say we're trying to minimize suffering through the 3 R's. Okay. In 98% of the intro psych classes that you're in, they would present this as if it's perfectly cool and that's what we do with animals and it's perfectly fine and let's go right here. Nothing to see here. There's something to see here. So I love critical thought. I love challenging you guys to think critically. I think we must think critically because I think, as you see right now in this world, we live in a world where activism is strong, and it should be. People should be thinking about things they don't like about the world, and they should be taking them on. We certainly see that going on these days with racism. We certainly see them going on these days with sexism. So we want all racial groups to be treated equally. We want both genders to have equal opportunity and to be treated as equally as possible. And then look at this in the middle. We got a cow head here. Speciesism. We don't want differences between races. We don't want differences between genders. But we're pretty cool with differences between species, different forms of life. And we want the better treatment. We want the one that we're the good form of life. The other ones aren't. So, unknown author. One day the absurdity of the almost universal human belief in the slavery of other animals will be palpable. We shall then have discovered our souls and become worthier of sharing this planet with them. So I want to tell you where I come from a little bit, and it's largely here. I think of all the existential crises we face, and we face many, environmentalism is a big one. And if we're ever going to learn to live in harmony with our planet, we have to treat the other animals, the other living beings we share this world with respect. Respect's a big word for me. We have to learn to respect other life forms. That certainly means not eating them, hence why I'm a vegetarian. But also, when it comes to research, scientists are supposed to be the ones that act rationally. They are the source of rational thought. If science embraces a double standard, if scientists say it's okay to do this to an animal, but it's not okay if we do it to a human, that's a double standard. And if science is embracing that, then why the heck should other people worry about treating animals poorly? It's by having this double standard, it's like science is saying there is something different. There is some reason for us to have a higher standard. What is that reason then? Okay, what is it? This is my critical thought question for you. What is it about being human that makes us worthy of being treated better than some critter that's not human? Well, you would think if scientists were doing this, there would be an answer to that question. I don't think there is. And I think scientists are in fact quite guilty of kind of fooling themselves in a number of ways. Let me give you one, dare I say, taste of that here, just to push your head around a little bit. You've heard this notion, have your cake and eat it too. It's usually, by the way, supposed to be the other way around. You can eat your cake and have it too. It makes sense when you flip it around, because that's the notion. Some people want to taste that cake right now, but they want to have it there tomorrow too. So they want to eat it now and have it at the same time to eat in the future, right? And the phrase is, you can't eat your cake and have it too. If you eat it, you don't have it. Now, so we use this phrase to say these are people who want, to both sides of something, and you can't have it both ways. So what's the scientist? What's the have your cake? Well, scientists will say, we do animal research because animals are similar enough to humans that the research we do with them will have relevance to us. So if we study disease in animals, well, that's only rational if what we find in animals will apply to humans. And by the way, usually it doesn't. Throw that out there for you, spoiler alert, which is, really annoying. But this notion is, okay, what we find will inform human stuff. So they're similar enough that research is worthwhile because it could help us. And yet they're different enough that it's ethically okay to do something to them that would be considered unethical if done to us. So they're walking this line. Animals are similar enough that the data will apply to us, but they're different enough that we're allowed to do nasty things to them. This sort of dual logic is really tricky. And you really want to say similar on what basis? What is this ethical difference? Different enough how? Different what makes something different enough that you can cut a piece of an animal's brain out, but you never do that to a human being? What is it? So first of all, back up a little bit. I am the rebel on most campuses in this regard, in feeling that we don't have justification to do things to animals that we don't do to humans. I don't see what it is. And often it seems like I am the lone crazy voice in a bunch of people who say, obviously it's okay, we'll learn something. That's why it's okay. Or some human could benefit from this in some way, and therefore it's okay. I like to make the point that I'm not alone in my position, and this is called appeals to authority. It shouldn't super impress you, but just to let you know that some important people, former director of NIH, traditional animal testing is expensive, time-consuming, uses a lot of animals, and from a scientific perspective, the results do not necessarily translate to humans. Quite often they don't. Mice are mice, people are people. If we look to the mouse to model every aspect of the disease for man and to model cures, we're just wasting our time. So this is the chief of the tuberculosis research section of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. The history of cancer research has been a history of curing cancer in the mouse. We must have cured mice of cancer for decades, and it simply didn't work in humans. So that was the former director of the National Cancer Institution. Currently, 9 out of 10 experimental drugs fail in clinical studies because we cannot accurately predict how they will behave in people based on laboratory and animal studies. So we're doing these things to animals, and it doesn't even translate. Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We've moved away from studying human disease in humans. We all drank the Kool-Aid on that one, me included. The problem is that testing on animals hasn't worked. And it's time we stop dancing around the problem. We need to refocus and adapt new methodologies for use in humans to understand disease biology in humans. NIH, former director. And researchers are so ingrained in trying to cure mice that they often forget we're trying to cure humans. A lot of people, basically saying, why are we doing these things to animals? So these guys are actually saying it's not a very effective thing to do. I'm saying it's not an ethical thing to do. We don't have the right to do this. And especially we don't have the right if it doesn't work anyway. So just something to think about. You're going to hear a lot about animal research as we go through. So I just want you to, and you may end up in a lab that's doing animal research. There's certainly a lot of animal research going on at every university, ours included. So what I'm suggesting here is that you think about it. Are you cool with it? Is it all right? What makes it justified? Here's two things that we'll watch real quickly. So this is like a video within a video, which is kind of weird, but let's try it. Let's just... being a troublemaker, which I like to do every now and then. This was actually me echoing what a student said to me in my class. There was a student arguing to me that scientists don't really believe in evolution theory, and they kind of gave that sort of argument, and I found it kind of compelling and interesting. I was using this video as a demo to show students a task I was asking them to do. But you see, I am being a troublemaker there, where I'm suggesting that scientists' behavior doesn't match. Their walk doesn't match their talk, and that evolution theory is in conflict with different ethical codes for humans and animals. Why do I have this thing sitting right here? Well, this is just an example of, often when people struggle and say, oh, no, there's a reason, and they'll say things like, oh, it has to do with self-awareness. Humans are aware of their own existence. And therefore, if you're making their existence bad, they're aware of that as well. But animals don't. They lack self-awareness, and therefore it's okay to do research on something that lacks self-awareness because it doesn't really understand what's happening to it. This is the kind of stretch. How do you know something has self-awareness? Well, check out something called the mirror test. I'll talk about it more in the course as we go through. But the question is, does an animal seem to recognize its reflection in the mirror? And what you find is that while many animals don't seem to, and you saw some examples of that in the video we showed, other animals do. Once they see themselves in a mirror, they figure it out. They figure that's me in the mirror, which means they have to have a sense of me. These include elephants, just about all of the great apes, octopus, dolphins, killer whales, a bunch of other critters as well. And so even something like self-awareness we see in some animals. And we're going to, this is my, let's see if this still works. Oh, come on. this is going in the Wayback Machine. This is my granddaughter. I'll introduce her to her. This I should say this was my oh, it's not going to work, is it? Or is it? Ah, she's older than this now. She's 8 or 9 now. But at this age, and what age would this be, you guys? I would guess this is just before a year. She's kind of standing with aid of something. But at this age, most babies think that reflection in the mirror, that's my daughter, by the way, that the reflection in the mirror is another child. They don't seem to realize it's a reflection of themselves. They'll sometimes go looking around the mirror to find that other individual. And so self-awareness, okay, we'll stop this now. All right, she's being a cutie. So that self-awareness develops gradually. So does that mean it's okay to do things to little kids like that? Could we take her, she has no self-awareness before she has any self-awareness, and could we do whatever we want to her because she lacks self-awareness? So give me your best shot. And in fact, I'm going to throw a little discussion probe under this. What is it that animals lack, but we possess, that makes it okay for us to have a higher ethical standard? I'll leave that for you to ponder, and I'll leave that point afterwards. So this is my big point, though. Do not indoctrinate your children. Don't just make them, accept something as true or good, when instead you can teach them how to think for themselves and to evaluate evidence and to disagree with you. And I welcome any disagreement for any of you guys. This is my point. Think about this. If you're in the science world, develop a position on animal research. Where do you stand? Check it out. Certainly before you do it, check it out. The other reason I mention all of this is, so I have my animal research, I have my animal ethics thing, but I also have another thing with all of you guys in mind. And it really goes with Miriam Wright Endelman here. If you don't like the way the world is, you change it. You have an obligation to change it. You just do it one step at a time. The reason I am so keen on promoting critical thought and creative thought and communication skills in all of you guys is I hope you make the world a better place. I hope there are things you don't like about the world that you think could be better, and that you try to change them. But in order to be successful at changing them, you have to be able to think critically about problems. You have to be able to think creatively about solutions, and you have to be able to communicate well to convince other people. And so all through the course, you'll hear me doing things like provoking critical thought, like I am here. In the peer scholar context, we'll actually be practicing critical thought, creative thinking, communication all the way through that. That's the purpose of peer scholar. And the bigger idea is I want you to develop these skills. For you, maybe it's not animals that matter. Maybe it's education of young girls throughout the world. Maybe it's racial equality in the justice system. Whatever it may be, I hope you find a thing or two that matters to you and that you have the passion to try to do something about. And then I hope you have the skills to be successful. And that's going to be part of this course, is trying to create these skills. So that's the other reason I bring this up, is to kind of poke your brain a little bit and get a little bit of critical thought going. All right, I'm going to leave it from there. I will have a little discussion thing. So just check out what's just underneath this. I'll see what's available to me, but I'm going to try to provoke a little bit of thought a little bit further. All right, later guys, bye.